off by looking at salt. Salt. Jesus says some nice things to us. I think when he tells us what we are. He tells us we're sheep that have gone astray. He tells us we're salt. Now I wonder what message he really wants to give when he says that we are the salt of the earth. Now is salt, next slide please, a blessing or a curse? We're going to look at the pros and cons, and here we have a picture. We can go to the picture if you like, Joe, yeah. We can get a picture of salt being extracted from the sea in the traditional manner, aided a little bit these days by pumps and the like, but basically it's putting the sea in a shallow area and letting the sun evaporate off the water. So, is salt a blessing or a curse? If I were to ask you what the most precious and valuable substance on earth, what would you say? Don't be misled, it's not salt. Okay. The most precious thing in the world is not diamonds or oil, but water. Okay. There's lots of it. Sometimes, in some places, too much. But there's more water than virtually anything else on the surface of the earth. Yet disputes over water are increasing, and many will predict that there will be more wars over water in the coming years than almost anything else. Because most of the water in the world is inaccessible to us. The oceans and the ice caps contain more water than we could possibly know what to do with. And yet they're tied up. Most of the water on the earth is unusable because it's salty. In our reading, the people were in the desert looking for water, and they found water, and they found it was salty. It was bitter. It was of no use. There would have been more harm than good. And that's the case of much of the water in the world today. We think it's not good. But in that little reading, we find that God was able, through Moses, to make it good. The first disadvantage, the first con of salt is that too much salt makes what is good unusable. But we can take the reminder that God takes what is useless and makes it good. Now, I'm sure that you've been told to reduce the amount of salt that you eat, that you take in. Healthy eating programs will urge you to use low salt or no salt foods. Later, when we look at the advantages of salt, we'll see why there is so much salt being used, but its overuse has turned a blessing into a curse. Have you ever gone to sprinkle a little bit of salt onto your food, into the cooking, and the top has come off and the whole lot has gone in? What was an advantage turns out not to be an advantage, and the food has to be thrown away. So salt has its problems. Talking about a lot of salt, or a little bit of salt, reminded me of the comment made by somebody about a group of ministers and comparing them to a load of farmyard manure. Scattered far and wide, it stimulated good and healthy growth. But when you put it all together in one place, all it produced was a strong smell, a steaming heat, and nothing else. I'm sure we could spend more time looking at how the blessing of salt has become a curse. But from our Bible reading today, when Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth," he definitely meant it to be a blessing and not a curse to those around us. And so as we move on, Joe, to summarise where we've just been, so we read that too much ruins good things: water, food, and our health. But we're now going to turn and look at what are the pros of salt. When Jesus said we should be like salt, what did he mean? What was he pointing out? And as we look at these, we've got to remember that if we are going to be bringing any good, any change into the world, it won't be out of what's in us. If the only goodness we can bring into the world is the little bit of goodness in us, it won't make much difference. We have to take what God is giving to us and let that flow through us. A quick look at the geography of Israel will illustrate this point. The River Jordan flows into the Sea of Galilee from the north and flows out again to the south. The water is fresh and alive. There's a fishing industry in the Sea of Galilee, even to this day. The same water continues to flow south and flows into the Dead Sea, where it stays. The Dead Sea keeps all the salt to come in small quantities, that salt that helps give life and all the things we're about to talk about. But as it builds up, as it gives out nothing, it kills everything. That can be like us too. If we don't give out, if we just keep everything that is in, we won't be healthy, we won't be stimulating life in others. So, to the pros of salt. The first thing that comes to mind perhaps today is not one that would have come to the mind of the Middle East first century hearers of Jesus' words. We use salt in the winter on our roads and footpaths to prevent ice forming and to stop them becoming slippery. We can import our thoughts today because although the Bible doesn't talk about it in that way, it does talk about pathways and not slipping and falling. Two verses from the psalmist, one we read earlier. The law of God is in my heart. My feet do not slip. And in Psalm 17, my steps have held to your path. My feet have not slipped. Now forgive me for slipping in that little, because normally I would like to keep to what the people in the Bible who heard those words would understand. And they would not have been using salt to prevent winter ice. So back to what there is. So we've had prevent slipping. The second, and perhaps the obvious thing that we came to mind, salt adds flavour. One of the main reasons that food manufacturers use so much salt is because as you add salt to food, it improves the flavour. It tastes better, and we all want to buy the food that tastes better. The influence God calls on us, his church, his followers to bring to the world is to make it better, to make it fuller, to make it more enjoyable. How many people today still think that the church wants to take away pleasures from life, to make life bland and unexciting? How have we allowed the church, the gospel message, to become bland and unexciting? Jesus said that he has come to bring life in abundance, in fullness. We need to start by asking God to challenge us, to remind us that life is good, that life with him is so much better, so much fuller, so much more of what it should be. If our attitude is more about avoiding bad things than promoting good things, we aren't the salt that he wants us to be. The salt adds flavour. The other great advantage of salt is it is a preservative. Another reason that food manufacturers pile more salt into the food than we would otherwise expect is that it prolongs the time the food is edible and safe. My brother-in-law originally comes from South Africa. Even though he's been in this country for over 50 years, his business still has those roots. His own company, and for those who are observant might have noticed something down here, is Sussman's Best Beef Biltong Company. And he makes biltong. Biltong is a way of drying and salting meat, originally done so that the settlers in America, it's probably known as beef jerky, but it was originally done by the settlers who were travelling across to the Far East or across the wild spaces of South Africa, and they had to take all their food with them. Now, if you take fresh meat with you after a week, you certainly wouldn't want to be eating it. After a fortnight, it would probably be a danger to everything. But if you salt it and dry it, it preserves it. Today, you'll find it in delicatessen counters rather than as a means of feeding you on your journey, because you're unlikely to be away from a food source for that long. But salt will preserve. Are we salt to the world? Are we reminding those who would otherwise perish that the salt that Jesus brings will keep us for eternity? If we are the salt of the world, we will be saving people who would otherwise not. Fourth area, salt heals. Not my area of expertise, we might need to ask Bill or Angela, but salt is a healing agent. I think if you get a mouth ulcer or have your tooth out, they'd recommend that you swill your mouth out fairly regularly with salty water, and this will promote healing. From memory and from the phrase about rubbing salt into the wound, it might not be an entirely pleasant thing to be done, but it is recommended to make healing quicker. Sometimes God puts us in a position where we talk to people who are hurting, physically, mentally, emotionally, or spiritually. Where God has helped our healing, we can share and help others. And finally, looking at the time, today salt is cheap. Not much is cheap today, we think, but I think you'd all agree today that salt is cheap. But to the hearers of Jesus, salt was a much more prized commodity. To throw it away, as is mentioned in the reading, would be like throwing money down the drain. Some people were even paid in salt. Salt was so universally needed, so universally wanted, that if you had a load of salt, you could barter for anything else that you wanted. Now, I'm sure not many of us today are paid in salt, but if at the end of the month you get a salary, then that's where the word is derived from when people used to be paid in salt, you're now paid as a salary. And when Jesus says we are the salt of the world, his salt, he is saying that we are valued. Each one of us is valued by God. If the only thing you remember this morning is that God values you and wants you to live with him and to work with him, not just in heaven, but here on earth. And that's a good thing to remember. Our reading today headed Salt and Light. And if I've managed to talk for 15 or 20 minutes about salt, I think we could keep going till tea time about light. But we had the children's talk, and the children have also been doing about light, and will be coming back in a few minutes just to show us what they've been doing. So we'll just stop there and remind ourselves about salt. Do you have the next slide, Joe? So salt is keeping safe, adding flavour, preserving, healing, and valuing. And the final slide, Joe, is Jesus says, you are salt to others. By keeping safe, by adding flavour, by preserving, healing, and valuing others. Jesus said, you are the salt of the world. Let's go and be salty. Our final hymn